The Jets lose a heartbreaker to the Patriots on a last-minute punt return touchdown, but did the team lose even more after another bad performance? Has Zach Wilson lost the locker room? That's what we'll talk about today on the Locked On Jets podcast.
You are Locked On Jets, your daily New York Jets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, this is the Locked On Jets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. It's Monday, November 21st, 2022, and I'm your host, John B. from GangGreenNation.com, thanking you for making the show your first listen or first watch every day. This podcast is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. If you like what you see or hear, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're watching on YouTube, please give this episode a big thumbs up. Helps the channel out, and it helps other Jets fans find the podcast. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is presented by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. Pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on your entry. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. Again, that's prizepicks.com, promo code LOCKEDON. We are here to recap a Jets loss yesterday, an absolutely heartbreaking defeat. The Jets fall to the New England Patriots 10-3 in Foxborough. The Jets miss an opportunity to move into first place in the AFC East and actually are now in last place technically. Now, they're still 6-4. They're still 2 games over 500, but they are last in the division right now after this loss. If they had won, they actually would be in first place because they'd be tied with Miami and Buffalo, but they have head-to-head wins against both teams, so they would own the tiebreaker. Really tough game. I thought the Jets were going to win the game. Even late in the fourth quarter, I figured it would be like a lot of other games this season. Somebody would make a big play. Well, somebody did make a big play. Unfortunately for the Jets, it was Marcus Jones, the punt returner for New England, who ran back a Braden Mann 84-yard punt for an 84-yard touchdown return in the final half minute of the game, breaking a 3-3 tie. It was a very windy day in Foxborough. I think what happened is Mann he was kicking into the wind. I think maybe he got a little rattled by the idea of kicking into the wind and maybe hit it a little too hard, because if you're hitting it into the wind, you kind of have to hit a line drive. The ball has to be hit with authority, because if you hit it too high, the wind's going to knock it down. Unfortunately, though, when you hit a line drive, it means you don't have hang time, and no hang time means your coverage guys do not have enough time to get down the field, and the Jets covered it terribly, and Braden Mann was supposed to hit the ball out of bounds, because at that point of the game, really the only way the Patriots can win, especially the way the Jets defense was playing, is on a punt return. So really, if Mann kicks the ball out of bounds, the game goes to overtime. So really, not a good job by Braden Mann, and the coverage unit did a bad job. But I think you have to ask yourself, and I think, to be fair, you cannot put that loss squarely on the punt game, because I don't know how you get to a point where the defense has allowed 3 points and you're in a position to lose the game in the final minute on the punt return. It just should not happen. The Jets' offense was horrible in this game, and if we're going to be honest, the biggest culprit was Zach Wilson. And I hate to do this, and I hate to single out the quarterback. I want Zach Wilson to be good, but here we are 20 games into his career, and it's just not happening. And I think you can never overreact to one single game. You have to put it into a broader context. In this game yesterday, Zach Wilson looked miserable. He could not complete basic passes. He could not complete checkdowns. It was a terrible performance by Zach Wilson. He looked like he was in completely over his head at the quarterback position. He was airmailing checkdowns. He was making bad reads. The question is that consistent with what we've seen through the rest of his career? And it feels to me like Zach Wilson, it's always one step forward, 2 steps back. And I keep trying to find a pathway, some sort of angle I can find that tells me Zach Wilson's moving in the right direction, that he's where you want him to be. And it's just becoming more and more difficult to find it. He plays decently against Miami and follows it up with 2 straight bad games, even though the Jets beat Green Bay and beat Denver. He plays a decent first half against New England at the Meadowlands a few weeks back, but then falls apart in the second half and throws 2 2 interceptions in the second half and one right before halftime. Last week against Buffalo, not spectacular football, but credible football. He did enough for the Jets to win. But then he follows it up with a game like this where it's not credible football, where he's awful. And as much as anything, I look at the performance and I say, maybe the results are different. Maybe there are some games where he's decent and some games where he's bad. But I see very similar traits in all of the games. I think the actual level of play is, even if the results are different, the actual level of play is pretty consistent, where he has very limited field vision at this point. He really just has no sense of pressure in the pocket, what he should do when he's under pressure. And his mechanics are a mess. I mean, for all the talk we've made, and I've said it as much as anybody about what a big arm he has, having a big arm doesn't really help you, first of all, if you're not accurate. But second of all, in a windy situation where a big arm should come into play, if your mechanics are bad, because if you're just kind of flipping the ball up on your back foot, off your back foot with bad mechanics, and you're not driving the football with authority, and you're not throwing spirals, the wind's going to take the ball. And it would be very easy to say, okay, the wind played an impact. And listen, the wind was obviously bad. If you watched Nick Folk or Greg Zuerlein kick the ball yesterday, if you saw those field goal attempts, you'd see the wind clearly did have an impact. But I don't know how much you can put it on the wind when Mac Jones is out there, who has a much weaker arm on paper, is completing 85% of his passes and can get the ball to, if Mac Jones is not, driving the ball with authority into the wind, is at least getting the ball where it needs to go when he's got an open receiver. As much as anything, and this is the point, we're 20 games into his career where you can't just write this off as, well, he's still, maybe he still is young, but you can't just write it off as he's at the very beginning of his career. You have to have standards at this point. And as much as it's about how badly he played in this game, it's also in the greater context of the rest of his career, where there are lots of games where he just looks completely lost. But there aren't many games where I think this would be easier to write off if you could point to games where he was spectacular, where he was great, where you saw a really high ceiling. Zach Wilson, to this point in his career, has one game with a 100 passer rating. It was 2 weeks ago against Buffalo, and that was a game where he threw 154 yards. So only 154 yards in that game. It's not like he lit it up, and on the game-winning drive, he had to complete one pass. Now, to his credit, he completed it. But 154 yards, one completion on the game-winning drive, it's not like this was Zach Wilson lifting the team on his back 2 weeks ago against the Buffalo Bills. It's just not where it needs to be right now for Zach Wilson. I mean, there's one game in his career where he threw for over 300 yards. It was the first meeting this year with New England. Again, the one game where he threw for 300 yards. You think he played well in that game? Where he threw 3 interceptions? No. And worst of all, and usually I hate speculating about stuff like this because you don't know what's going on in the locker room. But you can tell, I mean, it's public right now. It really looks like he's losing the locker room. And I usually, I'm very critical of people who say stuff like this because they don't know, but we're watching it. I mean, you saw Garrett Wilson's reaction. Garrett Wilson throwing his arms in the air after Zach Wilson doesn't even look his way on a third down pass. If you saw some of Wilson's post-game comments, he was measured. He did not exactly call Zach Wilson out by name, but you could tell that he was frustrated. And then in the aftermath of this game, you had multiple Jets defenders after Zach Wilson said he did not feel like he owed the defense an apology, or what, I can't remember the exact phrase, but he was asked if he felt like he let the defense down, something to that effect, and he said no. And you had multiple Jets players go on Twitter and like tweets that pretty much said Zach Wilson took no accountability. Now, John Franklin Myers was one of them, and he claimed later on that that was an accident. Did not mean to tweet it, but Sauce Gardner did it as well. And you're seeing from some of the beat writers who are in the locker room, the sense that Zach Wilson's got some work to do to rebuild trust. Listen, quarterbacks lose their locker room. It happens in the NFL. And maybe this is a sign of the times because, like when Mark Sanchez was around, Twitter was here, but Twitter wasn't what Twitter is today. Social media is not what social media is today, even if it was around in the Mark Sanchez days. But I'm struggling to come up with an example of a quarterback so publicly losing his locker room. I mean, maybe there's one or two out there, but, and again, maybe it's a sign of the times, but it really feels like Zach's losing the locker room. This is bad. I hate to say, listen, I've been trying to find like a way, and you've probably heard me really strain to find some sort of angle where I could say Zach Wilson's on a decent track, but I don't know. Yesterday feels like it may have been a breaking point. It's bad, and this is it's 6-4 team that's still in the mix. a 6-4 team that is not getting anything from the quarterback. A 6-4 team that would be in first place if they had credible quarterback play this year. I mean, I think it's just the truth. They're not getting good enough quarterback play. And it's unfortunate because they're wasting some really good defensive performances. And they wasted one yesterday. And as we continue on this Monday game recap episode of the Locked On Jets podcast, we're going to talk about what the defense did. Jets may have lost the game, but the defense kept them in it. Defense did everything they could. We'll discuss it ahead here on the show. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Total Wine and More. If you were a Jets fan yesterday, I'm sure you needed some wine after that game. Well, this holiday season, you can find what you love at Total Wine and More. With so many great bottles to choose from, it's easy to find a new favorite Cabernet or Chardonnay. Even if you're like me, if you've ever seen The Office, I have about the level of wine expertise Michael Scott has. There was an episode where he tried to show he was a wine connoisseur, and he picks up a glass, he says, "This is a white." Well, that's kind of my level of wine knowledge. That's why Total Wine and More is great, because they have pretty much so many great bottles to choose from that you can't miss. And you can find the perfect gifts for everyone on your list with some help from a friendly guide. And with all the confidence of knowing you found something special for the lowest price, you can love what you find. Only at Total Wine and More. Curbside pickup and delivery available in most areas. Visit TotalWine.com to learn more. Drink responsibly. Be 21. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by Turo. Turo is the world's largest car-sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, whenever you want, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada, and coming soon to Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for a family road trip. Get a classic or luxury car for a special event, birthday, or holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget and just need to get from point A to point B. Test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits into your everyday life. And I know a lot of you are probably traveling this coming week for Thanksgiving, so Turo could come in handy if you need a car. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you, and every trip is backed by liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo, Turo.com. Thank you for making Locked On Jets your first listen today. And for your second listen, check out Locked On Sports Today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and my good friend Peter Bukowski, the host, and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. And today we're breaking down a crushing Jets defeat. They fall yesterday to the New England Patriots 10-3. Miserable performance by Zach Wilson. Listen, there were other culprits on the offense. The offensive line, it's a patchwork group. They have multiple guys who are playing right now because of injuries who were not even on the roster at the beginning of training camp. It's not a good situation on the offensive line. They did not get the run game working, but a lot's on Zach Wilson. And it's unfortunate because it squandered an excellent defensive performance. Jets gave up 3 points in this game. You cannot blame this game on the defense. Well, obviously you can't, because even the game-winning score, the only touchdown the Jets allowed was on special teams. But I don't think you can say enough about the defense. Now, they caught some breaks. I mean, there was one New England play where a guy was going to go in for a touchdown and just fumbled and just dropped the football on the ground. But for me, this was almost encouraging because despite the 3 points, it wasn't like the Jets defense dominated. They gave up yardage. Last year, one of the go-to phrases when we were talking about the Jets defense was bend but don't break, which means you give up a lot of yardage, but you don't give up points. And unfortunately, last year, the Jets defense both bent and broke because they were giving up big plays. It's always bad when your defense is designed to not give up big plays when you're giving up big plays. That's what happened last year. This year, they've been great. I mean, this year, the Jets, it's not only that they haven't broken, it's that they really have not bent much. They've been very good at getting the ball back. They've not really allowed a lot of sustained drives for the most part. This game was different. The Patriots were able to move the ball effectively, but whenever the Jets defense needed to make a big play, they got it. And this was really bend but don't break. And this shows you why this is such a valid strategy in this league, because even when the Jets made some awful plays in this on defense. Ramondre Stevenson, there were a couple plays where he broke multiple tackles. He should have been stopped way short of the sticks, and the Jets just kept missing tackles. And to his credit, I mean, he's a good back, but the Jets defense was not tackling effectively. But because they were avoiding the big plays, the Patriots still weren't producing huge amounts of yardage, and they left themselves a shot. If you don't give up the 60-yard touchdown, if you're only giving up 10 yards or 15 yards, the offense still has to go out and execute again. And the whole theory behind bend but don't break is that even in the NFL, even guys as skilled as NFL players are on offense, if you ask them to execute 10, 12, 15 straight times to score a touchdown, at some point they're going to mess up. It's just they're human. Even as great as they are, they eventually will not make a play. But give the Jets defense credit, especially the defensive line, because this defensive line had 6 sacks in this game, and it felt like whenever they needed a sack, and this is as big as anything, whenever the Jets defense needed to make the big play, whenever they needed to register a sack, they got it. And I think there was one play in particular. Carl Lawson had a sack that knocked the Patriots out of field goal range. And again, it was a windy day, and I think it definitely impacted the kicking game. I don't know how much it really impacted the passing game, but obviously when you kick the ball, it tends to go a little bit higher. And you can see Greg Zuerlein kicked a field goal, the Jets' only points. You could see the way, and the Jets actually had to kick it twice because they had a penalty. The ball was really moving off Zuerlein's leg when he tried that field goal. And Nick Folk, Patriots kicker, he was having issues. He had one hit the crossbar that he did not get there, and the second time he kicked it, he was obviously it obviously was kind of in his head that he was short on his previous kick, so he kicked the ball too hard and he hooked it, which many years ago, if you're a Jets fan, you remember Doug Bryant did the same thing in Pittsburgh where he had one that hit the crossbar and then tried to hit the second one so hard that he badly hooked it. The Jets defense did, whenever they needed the play, whenever the Patriots were on like the periphery of field goal range, they made the play. And there was one huge play where Carl Lawson got a sack that really knocked the Patriots way back. The Patriots were in even makeable field goal range given the wins, and Carl Lawson registered the sack. Jets gave up yardage in this game, but they made the plays when they had to. And Quinnen Williams continued to dominate. Quinnen Williams, you just can't say enough about him. I'm to the point where if Quinnen Williams does not make All-Pro this year, something's wrong with the voting, because he's playing at such a ridiculously high level. He added 5 tackles, a sack, a tackle for a loss, another quarterback hit. A couple of those were stops where he really prevented a run play from gaining anything. His brother Quincy Williams had a sack in this one. Michael Clemens, the rookie, added a sack. John Franklin Myers did. I mentioned the Lawson sack. Just an outstanding performance by the Jets on defense. Bryce Huff also had a big sack. The sacks were so timely too, because they were essentially either ending drives, they were right at the point where the Patriots were about to really move into field goal range. Whenever the Jets needed a timely play, and this was like a situation where even though they gave up 3 points, they were giving up yardage, but they just found a way to get it done. And that's one of the things that's frustrating, because this defense has reached a point where it's carrying this team on its back. They just need a little bit from the offense, and they weren't able to get it in this game. And you see where maybe some of the frustration's coming in, because this defense is going out there playing at an unbelievable level, and it's like the Jets lose because they can't. The defense, for the Jets to win this game, the defense essentially needed to score. It wasn't enough to hold the Patriots to 3 points. It wasn't enough to dominate up front. It wasn't enough to get 6 sacks. The only way the Jets could win this game is if the defense scored. It's too much to ask the defense. It's a positive that the defense is this good. It's a positive that the Jets were actually in a position to win a game where their offense had 3 points. So these are positives, I guess, but it's got to be frustrating for the defense. And it's frustrating for Jets fans, but there is a little bit of silver lining. If you look at where the Jets are positioned, they're still in the mix even though they're in last place. And as we close out this Monday game recap episode of Locked On Jets, we'll talk about that. Today's episode of Locked On Jets is brought to you by PrizePicks. The less said about what happened if you had Zach Wilson playing daily fantasy, the better. But if you are a daily fantasy player, let me tell you about PrizePicks. You pick 2 to 5 players, and if they score more or less than their PrizePicks projection, you can win up to 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections available. And PrizePicks offers projections on any sport you watch. So if you don't want to pick guys going against the Jets, you just want to stay away from the NFL, you can also play the NBA, you can play the NHL, college football, men's and women's college basketball, soccer, esports, and disc golf. I still have never figured out how to play disc golf daily fantasy, but PrizePicks can show you. And entries can be made in less than 60 seconds or less. It's that easy. They have safe and fast withdrawals, and they are currently operational in over 30 states and in Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code Locked On. So if you put in $50, PrizePicks gives you $50. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks gives you $100. And don't forget to enter promo code Locked On at sign up for an instant deposit match of up to $100. This is the Locked On Jets podcast here after the Jets lose 10-3 to the Patriots in Foxborough. A tremendous defensive performance, an awful offensive performance, a dreadful quarterback performance with Special teams disaster mixed in. That's how the Jets lost this game, 10-3. The Jets fall to last place in the AFC East, but that's a little deceptive. I mean, it's frustrating because you had a shot to be in first place, and then you end the day in last place. All the Jets had to do was win. Nothing else had to happen yesterday for the Jets to end in first place. All they had to do was win. They needed no help, and they would have ended the day at first place in the AFC East. Now they're in last place. But it's a little deceptive because, keep in mind, Jets are 6-4 right now. They're still 2 games over 500. It's just the AFC East is having an unbelievable season. Every team's 2 games over 500 right now. So last place in the AFC East, there's no real shame in it. And here's the other thing. Jets are tied with New England. The reason the Jets are behind New England in the standings is obviously the Patriots now have the head-to-head tiebreaker, which could loom large in the future. You'd never want to lose the tiebreaker to a team you're this close with in the standings. But the Jets are just 1 game out of first place, behind Miami and Buffalo. Here's the thing. They own the tiebreaker against both of those teams right now because they beat them both head-to-head. And they have head-to-head games against both teams left. So they will have a chance to move up in the standings. Now, they have to travel to Miami against a good Dolphins team that presumably is not going to be playing its third-string quarterback like they were in the first meeting. They also have to travel to Buffalo to face the Bills, unless there's another 6 feet of snow in Buffalo. Bills' home game had to be moved to Detroit this weekend, which actually happened with the Jets game 8 years ago because there was so much snow in Buffalo. But we presume there's not going to be another 6 feet of snow that requires a venue change. Jets are going to have to go to Buffalo, tough venue. But they have an opportunity to make a move. And Jets are still in the mix in the AFC, the playoff race. When you start 6-3, it does build you a little bit of margin for error if you win games on the backside. And beyond that, I just want to remind everybody, I think we all would have signed up for 6-4 at this point of the season if we were offered it before week 1. The fact we're complaining at 6-4, that's a good thing. I mean, normally we're complaining because the Jets were talking about the draft in October. Forget about by Thanksgiving. So there's been progress this year. There are some ominous things. And listen, I cannot sugarcoat how alarming Zach Wilson's performance is right now. It's bad. It's not just as bad. It's that this is right now, we're to the point where Zach Wilson's entire career is in jeopardy. And I don't like saying that. I don't think it's an overstatement, though, right now, because Zach Wilson really has not shown you what you want to see. So I don't want to sugarcoat things, but I also want to point out that there are some things here that are not as bad as they seem. The fact that we're complaining about being 6-4, I mean, that's a positive. It shows you that we're not at the bottom of the league anymore. And, Joe Douglas has built a good team. Robert Saleh is showing some good signs. Even if they need to, over the offseason, figure out something else at quarterback, we've at least got some signs that, maybe things are moving in the right direction with this team. And they're very much in the race. Again, they're only 1 game out of the division lead, and they have games left against both teams that are ahead of them in the standings. And if the Jets take care of business down the stretch, now, again, we're going to need to see more out of the offense, but the defense looks really good. There's a chance the Jets still have a shot to end this season in the playoffs. We don't know how things are going to end. And that's the kind. Listen, I'm worried about yesterday's game. Yesterday's game is the kind of thing that can spiral on you, in part because it feels like there are issues in the locker room right now, and sometimes those can be just as damaging as anything that happens on the field. But there are some reasons for hope, and the Jets are not out of this thing yet. So try and keep some hope today. Try and keep at least a little bit of perspective that things could turn out okay. Anyway, that's all for today's episode. This has been the Locked On Jets podcast. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is our motto. If you enjoy the show, hit the subscribe button where you're watching or listening and the bell notification if you're on YouTube so that you'll never miss an episode. If you're listening on a podcast source and like the show, please give it a 5-star review. Same goes if you're watching on YouTube. Please give the episode a big thumbs up. Have a great Monday, everybody. We'll be back tomorrow to talk more Jets.